Okay, my name is Naluwembe Benaisa. I'm currently a postdoc at UCL in the Department of Anthropology, but I'm not an anthropologist. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar. My PhD was in migration studies, but this particular project I'm working on is called Citizens of Photography, the Camera and the Political Imagination. And I think I'm drawing on my experience of working now back to back on different research projects where I've conducted field work in Africa. One was a big project with Oliver Bakewell at Oxford, where we looked at mobility in the Great Lakes region. Then Oliver and I subsequently worked on a smaller project looking at the question of diasporas within the continent, so mobility within the continent as diaspora formation. And then I worked at the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen, Germany, on a project looking at the impact of mobile phones in Lagos on how people negotiate life in the city. And now this project has brought me back again to Nigeria, again working for 1 year. So the projects are all very different and differently funded, and so consequently also different in terms of us in the global north, in terms of what we had to deliver and how we report to the funders has been different in each of the projects I've worked on. But I'm always being brought back to one thing, and that's the thing I want to just touch on today and throw into the mix. So responding to these two questions that we were given on the program, I think one of the common challenges I've found is really the issue of the research question. You know, who sets the research question? And fine, we are the ones coming with the money, and we will find partners. In fact, we usually already have partners in mind we'd like to work with. But we've actually already set the research question, and to what extent is there flexibility on the ground then to re-look at that again? Because on the ground, depending on the universities or partners that you are collaborating with, they might make some radical suggestions in terms of, really, is this the thing you should really be looking at? We think we have another issue that is much more urgent and needs to be looked at. So that really brings us back to basically square one, is how can we work in a different way that tries to really unpick the whole academia project when it comes to working in Africa is still so tinged with, I'm trying to be polite, I'm trying to think of good words, it's still tinged with, it's still so tinged with this superiority complex. We know you best, we can diagnose you best, we know how to go about the work, and we know what the answers are going to be for your, whatever your condition is, from poverty to just being African, you know. And so, you know, we have to accept that. Well, there's a problem here. So we can't keep saying, oh, well, because this is the way we could go about getting the funding. And to this day, so many partners on the ground have said to me, we're always considered the local partners, like the juniors in the program, right? So, you know, and we know this is an issue. So what are we doing about it, you know? So like I said, from the research question then stems the issue of methodology, because the actual way we go about seeking our answers, again, I don't think necessarily always fits, and there isn't enough flexibility to look again. And, you know, I've encountered, especially in Nigeria, because Nigerians will always speak their mind, where they say, yeah, we already know you think you know what's going on, so just knock yourself out, do what you need to do. And you'll still go home and think you've written the, you know, piece. But they know that, you know, me asking in universities I've worked in Nigeria, why don't you use these particular articles on your reading list? And they're just kind of, yeah, well, you know, this is not really. So then I said, why don't you write a rebuttal? Write a rebuttal, saying, well, actually, this is all wrong. This analysis is just so off the mark. And they say, well, what's the point? There's no point. And at the end of the day, that's where we're looking to get to in terms of accessing funding for other research they'd like to do. So I do think that there is a real issue around the fact of also, I think about it as the research infrastructure, so it's very different. Some countries you work in, so we worked in Kenya. Kenya had a very strong research infrastructure of the loops you had to go through to justify and have your research validated, etc. And getting the permission to do the research. In Nigeria, it seems it's a wild west. People are coming. I've seen so many shocking practices by Western researchers. I'm just horrified. And I'm thinking, you're only doing this because you can get away with it. You would not be able to do it if you could not get away with it. If there was no comeback, no one reported you to your home university in the UK or the US, you would not be doing this. So, and I think that, again, to what extent do we try to follow up of what are researchers actually doing on the ground? And finally, I'd just like to say something briefly. Some of the most important collaborators are civil society. That's what I found in Africa. But they have a much more political agenda, right? So to what extent do researchers, do we have this discussion of, how can the outputs have more of be taken up for a more political purpose that may not be what your university wants you to do, but people on the ground are crying out for that. So so I think even though this last project I'm on is an ERC project, and ERC are very clear about, you have to think to what extent the data can be useful to the people on the ground, the countries you've worked in. And we've thought up some interesting things which may or may not be helpful on the ground, but I think it still goes back to the original research question issue, because maybe if there'd been more collaboration at the beginning, we'd have more data that is of use to the people on the ground.